hopefully you can be a part of that as well. It won't be left on YouTube very long, so if you want to see that particular episode of Digging Up the Bible, check it out there. And then later on, the 16th through the 19th of December, I'll be out at America Fest, run by my friend Charlie Kirk. Go to americafest.com to see. There's going to be a bazillion speakers there. I'm just a small person there in this sea of people. But you need to check it out. It's a fun celebration of America, and we're trying to get the church to take a stand for righteousness and truth, because Jesus told us to love our neighbor, and we need to do that in every area of life. All right, Tim, Dr. Tim Chaffee, let's go back to the question. I don't know if we completed the answer here. How could 8 people take care of all these animals? You said, well, some of them are easy to take care of. What about the more difficult ones? If you have enough food to take care of all those 6,700 animals on the ark?
Yeah, so that's what we worked into our calculations. How much space do they need for all the food? And there is enough room. It's one thing we did assume is that they were able to capture some of the water that is raining. So we've used the roof to capture some of that. All you would need is about an inch of rain every single week to have enough.
もうそろそろ出るでしょ、でもフードスタンプ。
わかりませんでした。
At least an inch a week, so that's not too big of a concern. Yeah, I think when we went to break, I was talking about how so many people try to look at the modern, our zoos and the specifications they have for how much space an animal needs to survive in there, in order to keep it. But that's not what we're dealing with. This is an emergency situation. If you think about your own home, you might have 4 or 5 people in this house, but if it was an emergency, the house is the only one in the area, so you can fit 5 to 10 times more than that in there for the time. It may not be comfortable, may not be fun, but if it's life or death, yeah, you can do it.
Well, it's amazing
書類の文字一つ
on
間
all
違
the
ってもダメ
calculations
な
you
の
did and how to incorporate
だから
it
英語
into
が分
the
かんなくて
structure.
内容が分かん
Give
な
us
く
some
て
insights
一生
into the
懸命やって
structure.
るわ
What
け
is this thing built of?
書
How
類が
long
行
is
った
it
り
going
来た
to
り行ったり
last?
来たりしてる
Yeah,
んだ
so the Ark Encounter, it's the largest freestanding timber frame structure in the world, and you've seen the different timbers. You've got Engelmann spruce and Douglas fir in there. The outside material
だ
is
からちゃんともらえるまでは余分な電話に出たりなんかしないで
it
く
better
だ
last
さい
50 years.
分かった。
I may not be
電話に出ても、じゃあ電話にもう出なくていいってことだね。
Yeah, it's built to last.
だけ
It's
ど
very
結局
sturdy.
かかってこなかっ
It's a
た
good
で
thing
し
I
ょ
was not involved in the construction because
つ
we
まりあ
wanted
れは
to
ブ
go
ロ
for
ーカーかセールスマンなの
That's right. And some of the
こっちでやってんのかね。
for lack of a better term,
全米でやって
the
る
in
んでし
there.
ょ
What are they made of?
Yeah, so the large timbers that you see in there,
Random,
the huge round ones that we call the lodge poles, those are primarily Engelmann spruce, and then the large
じゃあなんでエレアコードが945なの？
the square
私た
timbers
ち
that are
ここに来
the
て
headers
310 の
and
車
columns, those
電話
are
使ってるでしょ
So that's
だから今は何とも言えない
And some of them came from New Zealand. New Zealand, you said?
New Zealand was the covering, the outside wood.
Oh, all right. Yeah, it's a quite an impressive structure, and to build it in 26 months is amazing to me. Just to coordinate that whole thing. I don't know how many different change orders you had. For you architects out there, you know what that means, right? Oh, change order. Oh, I designed it this way, but now we're trying to build it. We need to change it. I mean, you must have had an amazing general contractor to pull that thing off.
Yeah, we really did. And I think we believe it's the whole project was of God, that it was something that we're doing for His glory, and He's going to make it work out. So He brought the right people at the right time, whether that is for the construction or for the design team that I'm part of. Bringing all the right people at the right time to do the job that we're called to do, so that the gospel can be shared to the maximum number of people.
And the gospel is throughout it, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just a plausibility display, although it is that. It's also pointing out that we need a savior, and you'll see that in there. In fact, Tim has put so much of the gospel throughout the entire thing. The entire team has, that you're not gonna walk out of there not knowing the gospel. So that's the beauty of it. In addition to the fact that it's an amazing structure, and it does give you a sense of, wow, this could really happen. Also, Tim, I've been reading through the book Inside Noah's Ark. What is your assumption regarding, and this is in the book, that's why I mentioned it, what is your assumption regarding the amount of technology, or the kind of technology someone, trying to build this thing 4,400 or 5,000 years ago would have? Do we even know?
Yeah, it's hard to know because the
338で
earliest archaeological finds that we come up with are post-Babel, the things that we're digging up, and so the flood represented a technological reset. So whatever they had at that time, other than what survived in the ark itself, would have been lost. I don't think that they would have had nuclear power subs or spaceships, anything that would help them survive a global flood. I don't think they had that level of technology. But I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that they had something that would have been comparable maybe to like the Roman Empire during Jesus' day, or maybe the Greek culture before that, where you have civilizations that can build some pretty remarkable things. And yet there's still a very decadent society, which is like what you read about in the Bible for Noah's time. It was a very wicked world, but I think that people have been very intelligent from the beginning, and they're creative. They can ingenious. They can come up with ways of doing some pretty remarkable things. And even say we kind of scratch our heads at like the Great Pyramid or Stonehenge and wonder how did they do that? They're smart. It wasn't aliens.
I scratch my head at some of these cathedrals I've been in Europe. Went to the cathedral in Reims, France. I just looked at it and go, this thing was built 800 years ago. How did they do this? No heavy equipment? No cranes? It's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't know. We don't know how they could do such a thing. How long did it take? Does the Bible say how long it took to build the ark?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people who think it was 120 years based on Genesis 6:3. They think that that's a countdown to the flood. That's not really my view, but I think there's a problem with that view in terms of thinking that's how long it took. When God told Noah to build the ark, he says he's going to make a covenant with him, his wife, and his 3 sons and their wives who were with him. So it sounds like the boys were already grown up and married at that point, which means it had to be less than 100 years, because Noah was 500 when his oldest son was born, and the flood came 100 years later. So it had to be under 100, and you got to give enough time for the boys to grow up and get married. So maybe 50 to 75 years max.
I know that Christians argue over whether this was a global flood or a regional flood. Those who say a regional flood will say, yes, it covered the earth where there were people, where people were inhabiting the earth, but not the entire earth. I know you guys take a global flood look. Is there evidence for a global flood outside the Bible?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, I think I just saw it this last weekend. I was, we were talking before the show, I was hiking through the Grand Canyon, North Rim to South Rim, and still a little sore. That was quite a trek. But you see these massive rock layers that are found all around the globe. So, for example, you have the Tepic Sandstone that is down at the very bottom of the canyon, sitting on top of what's called the Great Unconformity. And you can see that same rock layer in northern
こ
Wisconsin.
っち
where I
は
used to
ど
live.
ど
You
こ
can
の
find it
新
in
しい町
Israel.
にな
You
る
can
わけ
see
で
it
しょ、
in
こっち
northern
側。
Africa. So you have the same rock layer in many places around the globe. And it means it was laid down at the same time. It's the same composition. And then you have, and it's sitting right on top of that unconformity, but you have other things like that. So what we find in the fossil record are all of these sedimentary layers, miles of them in a sense, and they're full of fossils. So the sedimentary layers mean that they're laid down by water, and all these creatures are buried in that. And there's so much evidence that they were buried rapidly. It's not something that sits on the land, and when an animal dies, it doesn't become a fossil. It just sits there, it rots, and gets eaten by other creatures. In order for it to become a fossil, it has to be buried rapidly, and we find evidence for that around the globe as well.
There is evidence as well that just about every ancient culture has a great flood story. So that's more evidence that there was a great flood. And some of them even talk about building a boat.
Yeah.
Although the other accounts don't have a shipworthy, or I should say a seaworthy boat like the Bible does. I mean, would Noah's Ark float? I mean, would it really? Is it seaworthy according to the description?
Yeah, actually, it's got the right dimensions of what our large ships do today. Like a 6-to-1 ratio of the length to width and everything, which we have for our large vessels. A lot of people will say, like Bill Nye, the guy who plays the science guy, you can't build wooden ships that large because they just sink. There's too many problems. And he used the example of the Wyoming, which was built in the early 1900s. It was 430 feet long from tip to tip, so not quite the size of the ark, but pretty big. And he says the problem is when you put it out in the water, it twisted and bent and all these leaks, and then it sank, and 14 people on board were killed. And that's true, but he never mentions the fact that it carried thousands of tons of cargo back and forth across the Atlantic for almost 15 years. You can't build something that large. There's just certain challenges that need to be overcome. But if you know what they are, they can be overcome. But now we don't make large vessels out of wood. You don't need to. You can do it cheaper and sturdier when you're using steel or other metals.
And so that ship actually was seaworthy for 15 years. Noah's Ark would have to be seaworthy for about a year.
Yeah, well, maximum of 5 months before it lands on the mountains of Ararat. And then the water starts going down after that, yeah.
By the way, everybody wants to know, is Noah's Ark still out there? Has somebody discovered it? We'll talk about that after the break. In fact, in 2006, I went on a Noah's Ark expedition into Iran. Yes, Iran, because the Bible doesn't say Mount Ararat. It says the mountains of Ararat. I went with Bob Cornuke and Josh McDowell and several others. But I'm going to get Dr. Tim Chafee's perspective.
ここでほらいるわけいつも人がウィル朝から夜までずっとこの頃いないけど。
ガソリン代も
you're not a young earther. You're more agnostic. You think the evidence is greater that the earth is old. And is this a big divide? In my mind, it's not. Okay, because I think that Christians can disagree over that issue and still be saved. And Tim, I think you and Ken Ham would agree, correct?
Yeah, we think it's an important issue because ultimately for us it comes down to a biblical authority issue. That's really our emphasis. Mm-hmm. What does the Bible say? And we believe that is what it teaches. We understand some people don't come to the same conclusion, but ultimately one's salvation is not contingent upon what somebody believes about Genesis and how long it took God to make everything. And we've stressed that over and over and over and over again. There's so many times where I hear people say, well, Ken says you have to be young earth to be saved. He's never taught that. And I don't teach that, but I know there are some people who are passionate about the subject, so maybe it comes across that way. And I would just remind people who are on the other side and people who are on the young earth side as well. You look at Paul's example in Philippians 1, where he talks about how some people preach the gospel out of envy and strife. Some people do it out of selfish ambition. I'm not trying to make any accusations about anybody here, but some do it out of love. Either way, Paul rejoiced because the gospel is preached, and we can be grateful that we are serving the same God, and we are none of us are perfect. We are doing our best, the best we can, and proclaiming the truth of Scripture and the gospel. And we should unite on the gospel and seek to reach this lost and dying world.
Yeah, that's right. We need to do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know Ken Ham is very passionate about the age of the earth, but despite what you may think, he does not think you have to hold a young earth view in order to be saved. So just remember that, and don't let that, if you disagree with that conclusion, to discredit or have you overlook his fine work and Tim's fine work and other people at Answers in Genesis, their fine work, especially with regard to the Ark Encounter. It's very well done, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I think you'll be actually very encouraged and very intrigued and enlightened when you go to the Ark Encounter. So go to arkencounter.com to learn more about this. And Tim, I think the same is true, because there are some Christians who make the biblical case that the flood was regional. It took everybody out, but it didn't cover the whole earth. Mm-hmm. And your view that it covered the whole earth. Same kind of thing, right? It's not an essential in the faith, quite obviously.
Yeah, it's not an essential to salvation. I would say it would be more about consistency of hermeneutic and how we understand the Bible, and also consistency of the biblical message throughout. But it's not something that we split the church over and excommunicate people over. That's not one of those issues.
Let me ask you the moral question, and this is always brought up particularly by atheists. Of course, they have no moral standard by which to judge any of this, but they're stealing a standard from God and claiming God is somehow immoral. Mm-hmm. Well, they do that with the Canaanites. They do that with what they perceive as slavery in the Old Testament, even though it's not really slavery as we understand it. And they do it when it comes to God wiping everybody out in the flood. Why would God do such a thing? And why would he do it? Why would he do it drowning? Why not just kill him instantaneously? What's your view on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that somebody asked me the day that the Ark opened. We had a group of about 80 to 100 protesters, like the American Humanist Association. Their guys were there, and one of them asked me that question. Meanwhile, he's wearing a shirt that's promoting abortion, and so
he thinks it's a moral right, doesn't
exactly.
he?
It's fine to murder this kid, but it's wrong for God to murder. But it's not. And he was asking about this act of genocide, God wiping out this. And I said, it's not genocide. Genocide is when you single out a group of people. God didn't single out a group of people. It was all people except for the 8 people on the ark. It was judgment. And he's the creator. He's the creator of life, so he has the right to take life. But he was also patient. Peter talks about how God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. He gives people time to turn from that. And so the question about why a flood, why not just take them out in their sleep? Well, maybe 2 reasons that I can think of. One would be, if you take somebody out in their sleep and they had no hint, no indication that their life was about to end when they laid down that night, there's no opportunity for them to turn to God in the last moment. Whereas a flood, if you see or hear the floodwaters rushing in and you're done for within the next few seconds, that's enough time to be like the thief on the cross and cry out. And so there's an opportunity for forgiveness right there. And the other thing is a flood leaves evidence. It's a reminder that God judges sin, and you can go and look in the Grand Canyon like I was this last week, and you can see layer upon layer upon layer of rock with fossils buried in them, and it's a constant reminder that God is serious about sin. He judged this world once before, and he's going to do it again someday. And just as he provided a means of physical safety for Noah and his family in the ark, he's provided a means of eternal salvation from our sin and eternal punishment apart from him in the lake of fire. He's provided salvation through his son, Jesus Christ, and he offers that to all.
Ladies and gentlemen, if God exists, and he does, and if Christianity is true, and it is, people don't really die, they just change location.